Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the final RIBAJ Fire Safety webinar for 2021, part of a series we have run in partnership with Hilti, and so we'd like to thank Hilti for their continued support. Today, our topic covers fire safety in practice, and we're going to be talking about what architects need to know about the Building Safety Bill and the role of the principal designer. I'm so pleased that we have our expert panel here today. We're going to have presentations from Jane Duncan, OBE, and also from Louis Ayllón, and he's from Hilti. And then we will be speaking about the role of the principal designer with Paul Bussey from AHMM. So I'd like to introduce Jane to you and her presentation. Thank you, Jane.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Simone. Well, good afternoon, everybody. This is going to be quite interesting. I've been given 20 minutes to tell you how the entire construction industry is about to change, which is almost impossible. So what I'm going to do is a very quick whistle-stop tour through what I see are the key impacts on designers and what we know so far about the bill. And I'll be making comments on the way through, but not very many because I don't have enough time to make too many. So hopefully you'll save up some questions for the end. Next slide, please. So I will bring you back to this. This is the catalyst. We haven't to forget this is what occurred that made everybody wake up, I think. And obviously there was a Pandora's box of ghastliness that opened up, not just for the industry to see, but the entire world, to be honest. And there's lots of outcomes for the profession. We're all feeling them now, and it's going to be more intense. Next, please. So the background to this event, obviously, is we started a year ago with a roundtable discussion, a fantastic discussion with a very broad cross-industry group, and three issues emerged. PI insurance, still a big issue. Procurement and responsibility, still big issues. Competence, even bigger. So we really got it right in November 2020, and it's ongoing. Next, please. Then there were follow-up Q&As in articles in the RIBA journal in February, March, and April, tackling each of these topics. So I hope you've read them. Insurance exclusions, well, we know about those. Shoveling off risk, and this is an area I feel very strongly about. Architects actually need to shoulder some understanding of what the risk is and be able to talk to clients. And then rebooting construction in terms of its competence. Critical subjects. Let's move on. Next, please. So what is the problem? I mean, should we really be worried? Yes, we should. I put it as a juggernaut. The world for architects and most of the construction industry is changing and will change. The key changes are the Building Safety Bill, which is enormous potentially. Competence requirements for everybody in the industry, and you'll be aware already of what's happening with architects. I'll talk about that in a bit later. We're all going to have to be trained for the role that we need to take in the future. We need to be doing the CPD. We need to be accredited, perhaps, if we want to take BD roles. And we really need to understand our responsibilities anew. Well, the new duty holders and what will happen within that is massive. There's more to come from Paul later on that, so I won't talk too much on that. But let's move to the next slide. So this is just a bit of quick timing for you so you understand where we are. The Building Safety Bill had its second hearing introduced July this year, so not very long ago. And we've been told it's about a year until it gets Royal Assent, so probably July 22. And what we do know, of course, is that we are going to have at some point soon Gateways 2 and 3 will be explained next year. You're probably already aware that Gateway 1 is already been introduced in August this year. Now, the phase 2 of all of this is going to be about information from secondary legislation. And the issue with the Building Safety Bill is it's a series of aims, really, without an awful lot of detail. And the detail is being discussed at length. The RIBA and a lot of others are involved in that to try and make it work for everybody. But the information on that probably isn't going to be with us for a further year. And then in phase 3, for the last 6 months of 2023, hopefully no longer than that, we'll go through a transition period where the regime will be enforced and everybody's going to be feeling their way through it. Next slide, please. So what are the key issues? Well, we knew what they were aiming at. The headline provisions of the bill, as we heard it, didn't really change from previous announcements and drafts. There was to be a new regulatory regime for higher risk, high-rise buildings, a 3-stage gateway system for planning. So part stage 1 gateway is already there, and establishing a golden thread of information, mostly digital, relating to fire safety and compliance. All perfectly sensible. I mean, it strikes me as being very odd that this wasn't there before, but it wasn't. Next slide, please. So what exactly has changed? What is going to change from the key issues in the Building Safety Bill, and which are going to affect architects? Okay, take a nice deep breath, and I'm going to bash through the outline of what's about to happen to us. So next slide, please. Firstly, what's changed since Grenfell? Well, the building regulations have changed. The first change, of course, was the external wall and cladding changes for residential buildings over 18 metres. It's quite interesting, this 18-metre issue, because we've got a number of different heights mentioned in various different guises. But here we are, cladding's over 18 metres. As you know, there's been a cladding scandal, which you will have heard of, particularly for people who are in buildings under 18 metres who are not yet getting help. So what changed? In 2018, the B41 guidance in ADB 2006, which was class 0 or BS 3D2, with sort of some parts of limited combustibility, got changed to the ADB 2019. And in table 12.1, you now need to read everybody will know already that we're now changing to having really low combustibility. That's the point, either none or limited combustibility. And then there were a few text changes and other drawing changes. It was quite controversial because it hadn't really been thoroughly thought through. It was sort of rushed together, but I think we'll get there. And at least the building regulation changes were urgently needed, and these are en route to making something better, I hope, in the end. But I'm rather sad to say, well, why did it take the Grenfell disaster, a disaster of that nature, to make this change? I mean, this is something I don't understand, how an entire industry, and it was an entire industry, got so either complacent or used to copying and pasting, or pressured from clients and developers to following what was in the regulation guidance here, but really wasn't fit for purpose. It's a big question, really, isn't it? Next slide, please. And then in the building regulations, now, interestingly, sprinklers now they're now supposedly required in new build residential buildings and where there's a mature change of use. So that's quite good that it's both. But the height, it was 30 meters. Now it's down to 11 meters, but it's not mandatory, and it can still be risk assessed, whatever that means. In other words, you can get away without it somehow. And so this to me is not actually good enough. If you need to have prescriptive regulation, you can't have it not being mandatory and somebody can argue their way out of it. And we've definitely been hearing from insurers saying, you know, you can't have, how are we supposed to insure a building if we don't know whether or not it's adequately specified with protections? Next, please. What else? Well, the stay put policy, everybody knows that was really, really difficult. It failed at Grenfell. And it's not really surprising. I've got a little photograph there of a trial where we have people coming down the same staircase that firemen are going up, and that's even before they've put their huge pipes full of water up these staircases. You can't have a single staircase, as we did in Grenfell and as are in many buildings, old buildings, refurbished buildings, and unfortunately now new buildings still going up with a single staircase. If there ever comes a time when you need to evacuate people, it doesn't work, and many people died in the stairwell, and I must say the insurers don't like it at all. Next, please. And what else? Well, there's the Fire Safety Act. Well, this actually was about having fire risk assessments for residential landlords and making sure that the flat doors and the external walls and all the common parts had a risk assessment. I mean, it's just common sense, isn't it, really? But I put the point in. He's quite right. You are going to need to have a design specification, because otherwise, how do you know what's where and what needs doing? So there's a really lot of work to do here. Next, please. And then we have the Building Safety Bill. This is all sort of sequential. So it had its second reading in July 22. And the general gist of it was making fundamental cultural changes to the built environment sector in relation to fire, structural and public safety. I mean, it's a huge thing to do. But what a lot of people don't realize is that actually the Act and the changes to the culture in relation to fire, structure and public safety were to be in all buildings. Although there were additional requirements for higher risk buildings, buildings 18 meters high or 7 stories above, but all buildings are really in scope of a building safety bill now, so we need to be aware of this. Thank you. Next, please. Well, we're at planning stage 1 gateway, which is relatively straightforward, but a fire statement, of course, is now required by legislation from August this year, has been required. But we have a little bit of difficulty because the building safety regulator, well, the system for that is not really quite there yet. So I'm not quite sure who's going to be checking the fire statements, but presumably there's something interim in place. I'm afraid I don't know it. Maybe Paul will be of help in that one. Next, please. One of the things that came up in this July reading of the Building Safety Bill scared the pants off me, my expert panel, and a lot of other people in the industry, because they were proposing to adopt changes of operation of the Defective Premises Act. Now, it all seems to make some sense unless you read the detail, where it's allowing owners and leaseholders to literally just sue anybody connected with provision of a dwelling not fit for habitation. So this is everything: refurbishment, works to homes, not just new homes, existing homes, change of use to homes, and 15 years worth of house alterations and extensions were and are in the frame. But we haven't yet got the scope of works defined. We're very worried that this could prompt claims against the design team. And I've been personally involved in one scheme, luckily not too many, where I was, as architect for a project, literally last man standing. Everybody has disappeared off the face of the earth and collapsed their businesses or whatever else they needed to do. And although none of the requirements of this were directly pointed at me, my PI insurance had to cough up nobody else was there. I can see this happening unless something happens with this change to the Defective Premises Act. It's pretty scary unless we can change it. And next slide, please. So this is the key thing that everybody's worried about. Everybody's practices are having a bit of a hiccup. No doubt you've been affected, because I think everybody has been affected. If it isn't just the rates, the insurance going up, it's the ability for practices to get the right insurance, and there are lots of exclusions, which I find totally unacceptable. But of course, if we've suddenly got to have 15 years for claims to be dealt with, and going back, this is retrospective from next year, I've no idea how that's going to be coped with, and I hope that the government will listen and just say, you can't do this, it's not possible. because it's going to have a huge impact if we haven't already had impact on our liability and actually ability to practice. So I think this really needs some thought. Next, please. You can see we're in a bit of turmoil with all of this, but there's one or two things which we know that we know things are going to happen. The ARB is going to have a different role. It's interesting. They're going to have new powers from government to monitor and assess competence of architects all the way through their careers. They're talking about a 5-year refresher test from 2023. I think we'll all probably retire by then, won't we? With a possible deregistration as an ultimate sanction if you don't do what you're supposed to. And they'll have powers to publish disciplinary orders against an architect, taken by the Professional Conduct Committee. It's not dissimilar to what's happening now, but the government have been working with the ARB to determine the length of time a disciplinary order can be listed on the register. And of course, that does affect people's livelihoods. Next, please. So, what else is coming in? Well, competence. Competence is one of the biggest issues in my book. In particular with the principal designer and principal contractor, but actually competence is a bigger topic than that because it affects everybody in the industry. And I think although everybody's talking about individual professions or individual roles and the competence required for those, I think there's another one. Perhaps we could talk about this, which is competence in terms of collaboration. How do you become competent in managing other people to the point everybody is working together to be able to bring a truly professional management and the end product, which is fire safe and keeps the public safe? Difficult topic. Next, please. So it's really going to be tough. This is just a really quick view of it, but it is going to be a difficult one for architects. Actually, it's going to be difficult for everybody. Everybody's going to need to have training. There's going to be the building safety regulators, oversight on everybody. And we've all got to do our CPD. We've all got to, and that's everybody in the industry has got to look at procurement. And well, the issue is the procurement is quite simple. I mean, the difficulties with procurement have, in my view, driven down costs to the point where quality has gone out of the window long ago. That's got to come back. We've got to have a smart procurement, sensible procurement that will make sure that the buildings that are created or amended, adapted, retrofitted, whatever's going to happen to them from now onwards are actually fit for purpose. And purpose means not just, okay, that they're going to make enough money for their developers, but or we will be cheap to run, but will actually be a legacy and be safe into the future. Otherwise, the insurance industry is going to turn their back on us, I think. Right, next slide, please. I'm nearly finished. This is something that my expert panel at the RIBA is very, very keen to keep pushing the government on, which is the need for clear prescriptive regulations, a baseline everybody has to follow, and without the potential for people to sort of worm their way out by using parts of the guidance which are not clear or bringing in specialists to do special computer packages to actually mean you don't have to follow regulations. I don't know how people have managed it before, but it just seems to have become the thing. And we have to get away from the thing and make it, as architects, we have ethical and social responsibilities. We can't do this anymore. We have to speak up. We have to have some advocacy for sensible regulation. I mean, I'm quite old enough to remember working in London when the regulations were clear. You had to go to the district surveyor to get approval. If you didn't get approval, you were hammered. That's it. This is exactly what we need. I know, I'm not saying it was all better in the old days. It wasn't, but believe me, everybody was in the same boat. The level was a basic level, but everybody had to meet it. Okay, let's see why I'm thinking this. Next one, please. Now, one of the speakers in here is probably going to recognize this photograph. This young Paul, that's his desk look. Why do we need clear, unambiguous guidance? Well, Paul is the head of the technical stuff for AHMM. He knows more than anybody else just how many bits of paper you need to have a look at to try and wend your way through the ADB. It's ridiculous. It's bonkers. Look at this lot. Absolutely crazy. We should not be needing all this stuff. Next, please. What I'm actually saying here is that I think the government needs to do their bit. They must expect a lot from the industry, but they also have to do something with the regulations themselves. Now, the RIBA has been doing what it can do. The Way Ahead published last year for a new educational and professional development framework. I'm quite sure you're all too well aware that RIBA members are now going to be tested every 5 years on the first mandatory subject, which is health and safety knowledge, including fire safety. So you need to mug up because you're going to be tested. And I'm going to I don't usually do this sort of stuff, but I'm going to hold up there. I don't know whether any of you can see this. This is the RIBA Health and Safety Guide. It is a very good, basic, brilliant, simple guide to making sure that you're thinking about health and safety all the time, at all levels. And I think if you can sort of absorb that, you'll get through the test. You don't actually need to be a fire specialist to get through the test. You just need to think about it in the same way as we all now think about sustainability. And you can see the next ones: climate literacy, of course, and then ethics and social purpose and research. Why not? Obviously, these are things important. Next, please. So is the industry ready to do what's needed? I don't know. How do we stop this juggernaut? For me, it's working together across industry. And we've got a lot to do to regain public trust and to make sure that people still will respect the professions and respect the construction and feel at least secure in their homes. I mean, it's a bit trite saying that, but to be honest, I think they have every right to expect that. And the question is, will it improve competence and the right insurance and reliable product information? Believe me, there's a lot to be done there, and really good procurement and perhaps even different forms of D&B contract. Is that going to be enough to do what the industry needs to do? Well, let's hope. Next, please. Okay, architects, this is very straightforward. Higher standards of competence, responsibility. Yes, we've got to take some more. We've got to have some industry leadership. Everybody's looking to us. I don't know whether you're aware. People are looking to architects to lead this, because actually it requires social and ethical response to this issue, and then a professional view of how to achieve competence and how to stick with it. And if it's not us, then who's going to do it? Who is going to do this? We have to do it. Next, thank you. Okay, so I say lots to talk about here. Let's discuss it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Jane. I always really enjoy listening to you speak about this this legislation that's coming into play, which is underway, and really being able to draw the audience's attention to it. It's very, very important changes which are being made to our industry. And I know that you mentioned, Jane, about the RIBA Health and Safety Guide.
Yes.
You did raise the book, and I wanted to let the audience know that this is available at the RIBA bookshops, which I believe they have like a discount season throughout November or something. And
I think
there will be
20% at the moment.
20%, but it's not even, it's affordable in any case. You can just purchase it at full price. It's critical to have this book. And you can, there will be a link, I think, in the chat, which is coming up for the audience to be able to purchase that. Thank you again. And I do want to let the audience know that we will be taking an audience question and answer session after all of the speakers have spoken today. So if you have any questions for Jane specifically, or any of our other panel who are going to come on shortly, please put your question into the chat box, and we have a team, Amber at RIBAJ. She'll be able to put your question to us so that we can ask that to the panel, and specifically to who you want your question to be answered by. That would be very helpful. So thanks again, Jane. And we're going to move on to our next speaker, who is Louis Ayllón from Hilti.
Hello, good afternoon.
Hi, Louis. And Louis, you'll be speaking about a fire stop design and implementation, and you'll be presenting a case study for the audience. So that will be really helpful. You know, how is this going to work in implementing into our projects? Please go ahead with your presentation.
Okay, thank you very much for the introduction, Simone. And I'll be sharing the screen now. Let me actually know when you can see it. Right. You can all see it, right? Yeah, perfect. Good. So thanks very much for the introduction, Simone, and thank you very much, Jane, as well, for the insightful presentation. I think that it fits perfectly with the case study that I'm bringing here today. This is about the Midlands Metropolitan Hospital in Birmingham. And I'm going to just go very quickly and very briefly through the agenda, what we are going to be covering. Again, I've got I think 20 minutes is more than enough to actually highlight the key points and on why do we bring this case as a, let's say, successful case study when it comes to fire protection. We'll be going through very briefly about a bit of a project background information because there were some initial kind of issues or challenges with the project involving a change on a main contractor, and then we'll go straight on to the main part of it, which is going to be the design stage. What has been different? That fits very nicely with what Jane has actually been talking about. What are those changes and what is the involvement that the role plays, or the, let's say, the roles and responsibilities from each different part that gets involved in every project, including main contractor, including a principal designer, architect in this case, and ultimately as well ourselves or any other manufacturer, right? Then we'll go through the case study itself, what was the tailored solution that we developed for non-standard results, or non-standard solutions and standard solutions, and then we'll go through a few results. Right, so going on to the project, the MMH, or Midlands Metropolitan University Hospital, was approved and awarded in 2015 with an estimated value of £267 million investment value. Carillion, as you may probably remember, some of you, was one of the main contractors, largest main contractors here in the UK. They were appointed as a main contractor, but then they went bankrupt in January 2018. And then the project was on hold for some time, with 20% of the project they completed. End of 2018, Balfour Beatty was appointed to finalize the project and to get it finalized by mid-2022. Now, in terms of the different parts that were involved on that project and that currently are involved in that project, because it's not finalized yet, we are finalizing a few bits on it, and there are a few months to go. As an architect, principal designer in this case, it was HKS. Balfour Beatty as a main contractor, and there was some other involvement, such as a Curtins Consulting as a structural consultant. And I'll try to actually reflect why I'm including also as well a structural consultant here. In terms of Hilti, or how did we get involved as a manufacturer? We got involved at the beginning of the project, and then we kind of decided with the main contractor and with the architect what was the scope of works. A very early definition was quite important to actually come up with a successful outcome of all that work that was put together from the different parts. Going strictly onto the design stage, what was different, right? From the main contractor point of view, it was agreed with Hilti on the definition of the boundaries before the M&E or the services design was carried out. I'll be explaining this a bit more in detail, which will give you a much better information or much better knowledge on what I am actually talking about. The idea was also to collect the typical applications or the typical penetrations that were going to happen, and also the worst case scenarios. From Hilti point of view, our responsibility was to analyze also those typical cases and the worst case scenarios and try to create standard details pack with the products that were compliant, that were also suitable for those applications, and that were actually the right ones for each different part of the project. Then also review the non-standard scenarios and evaluate what would be the impact in an early design stage. The architect, working closely with the main contractor and with Hilti, also we worked together on that creation of those standard details. That then the creation of those standard details actually they led to create a reference pack that could be suitable and that was and is being suitable for every single part of the project, starting from the architect, continuing with the main contractor, and then also going on to the subcontractor who is finally doing the installation of those elements. So this reference pack is something that has been a key point of reference for every single part involved in all the different stages of the project. From there were some drawings that were being developed based on that package that were specifics for each different applications. Then, looking at the traditional design flow when it comes to mechanical and electrical, in this case, yes, focusing on the overall fire protection, right? When it comes to the normal or the traditional flow that has happened in the last years and that we are seeing now that slowly is changing in the industry, we start with the concept, right? What are the number of services that we are needing for the project? And that is based on the different service types, the number of beds that are needed, what is going to be the waste and consumption, and other specific requirements. Then we move on to what type of services will we need, a number, type, size, volumes, etc. And then how the main corridors and plant rooms are going to look like. And that is something that is fairly common and is fairly easy to start actually doing the design for any single project, whether it is residential, hospital, etc. Now, from there we move on to a spatial and openings configuration, and we define, or traditionally has been defined, the multiple services penetration with the supports, with the pipe and cabling that is needed for electricity, and then we kind of find out or figure out roughly what the opening sizes are going to be needed in these cases. We move on to more for those multiple services and for those pipes and cables that are going to be installed, what are going to be the supporting services that will actually take those loads, and how can we actually make sure that those services are being installed properly. And then last bit was the dry liners or the drywall installers actually to seal everything properly as best as they could with the 5-star systems that are available in the market and that we think that are the correct ones, right? As I've mentioned here at the bottom, it actually leads to things that, the selection of the products may be not the correct one. It also leads to having a lot of engineering judgments because those openings are not covered by any test by any manufacturer, etc., etc. So this so far has been a traditional, let's say, design flow. What has been different in this project actually is that we've gone all the way through from the concept and service configuration, which is something that was part of the traditional method as well. But then we've moved passive fire protection design from the bottom or from the bottom of the chain, yes, to the intermediate, basically. And that was an agreement between the main contractor, the architect, to actually define which are the boundaries. What are the limits of the products? What is the product being tested up to? How big are the openings that are being covered by those products? We set those limitations, and then we produce solutions, and we identified which were the possible solutions. From there, we actually started to define how the spatial configuration and the openings on site should be and have to be limited to, in terms of having openings no larger than this, size and having no more services together more than those ones, right? Those are the ones that actually goes after the design or the selection of these passive fire protection elements. And then lately, or last but not least, right, which are the supporting systems that we are going to use and we are going to put together to support all of this, right? Of course, all those supporting services systems, those need to be according to the fire requirements, so those need to be as well fire-rated supporting systems. The installation has to be done accordingly to the passive fire protection manufacturer instructions, and also for the according to the supporting systems manufacturer instructions as well. So that was the last part of it, which from here we could actually evaluate and have a risk mitigation exercise to understand the different parts and how can we actually make sure that we don't end up with as many engineering judgments as we were having in the past. So in essence, from the beginning, starting with the definition and clear definition of a passive fire protection boundaries, which are the limits, what falls under the standard detail, what falls under the things or products that have been tested, and how can we actually make sure that then moving on to the mechanical and electrical design, those designs for the mechanical and electrical services fit onto those fire stopping limitations. Then we go together onto the final stage where we actually see, okay, 90% of the applications, 90% of the penetrations can be covered with standard detail, can be covered with an element that has been tested for this application. And then we kind of move and take all of this forward. And it's like, okay, this 90% is correct. And then what happens with this 10% that is not covered by the current testing data that we currently have for those products? So that is how we came up with this standard detail spec that we actually put together, as I said, for the architect and the main contractor. And then we actually defined it, as you can see here, starting with single penetrations and also starting for a flexible wall systems, a plastic pipe, metal pipe, and also always giving different options for different types of pipes, different types of elements and materials when it comes to cabling as well, and giving always a couple of options and a figure or a number that reflected these standard details, so we can refer back once we go onto the detailed design. Same for concrete wall, for single services, also multiple services penetration, and then concrete floor as well. And here is where I refer back to actually, without going much onto detail for this, onto the structural engineer, that also they will probably have to also be involved in some of those rises, where some of those services have to be fire stopped, and where the fire stop manufacturer has to also work with the architect and with the structural engineer to come up with a solution. Early engagement is also something that will save a lot of engineering judgments and remedial solutions further down the line. As an example, you can see here what one of those standard details looks like. And that's why I'm saying, and what I said before, that those standard details were used from the architect going through the main contractor and also all the way through to the installer, because it contains all the information that is needed for the different type of pipes, different sizes, etc. What is the approval reference, supporting distance, maximum, I mean, in essence, all the necessary information for all the different parts involved. Looking at how a multiple service penetration would look like, we would take as well one example, and we would actually define as well all the different conditions that have to be met in order to actually be able to implement this standard detail in a possible opening that we would have on site. And that's how then, moving on to then the detailed design, is being referred back. So this is an example of then specifics about the project that are being referred back, as you can see here, to this standard details pack. So everyone, again, going back to from the architect, main contractor, and then subcontractor as well, or installer, can refer back to any detail that they will need during the installation time, for example. Now, non-standard details, and here's where this 10% comes into scene. We've managed to, by actually getting early involvement onto the design, we've managed to actually move from roughly half of the applications being remedial solutions onto roughly 90% of those applications being standard details, a standard tested applications that we don't have to actually go on to look onto engineering judgments, etc. But there's always things that have not been tested that will go out of the normal scope and that cannot be met with the current testing data that the manufacturers have. And that is where we actually can come up with something specific that can take or meet a majority or the worst case scenario for those situations with multiple services, with dampers, with movement, etc., where we can actually put an engineering judgment together, evaluating and assessing the situation, and also provide a full system approach. That means that, for example, for this type of application, which is an above door system penetration, where you've got dampers, you've got movement as well, deflection movement, you've got pipes, you've got cable trays, etc. And we can come up with a solution which is fire compliant. It also has fire-rated channel systems, which is also compliant with the fire requirements, and also fixings, because also fixings have to be fire-rated to be able to have a proper fire-rated overall application. Right? And that's how, for example, we would deal with a movement in this case, just putting some movement accommodation with some specific products that, based on test data or test evidence that we would have as manufacturers, we can actually come up with a solution. That is always been proposed by our fire engineer, and that's something that goes through an exhaustive process of checking and review. Results. Again, going from the design, that was the standard details pack. Specifics for the different applications, the different locations on site. Then mock-ups that were created on site with the specific details referring back to this standard details pack. So everyone who could have any question about how to install something, they could refer either to those mock-ups that were on site installed, or actually going back to the standard details pack because there is a specific reference in this specific detail. Going all the way through also training. And again, I think that here I can probably just spend an extra minute on actually emphasizing the fact that Hilti as a company, we've not been doing this for a couple of years. We've been working with yourselves, with architects, for many years, way before the tragic events happened a couple of years ago. We've been working that way, trying to work and collaborate with architects, getting involved in early design stage with main contractors. Now, more and more main contractors want to do this early engagement with the Hilti or five-stop product manufacturer in this case, and also even clients, even the proper clients or the owners of the buildings. They are the ones that want the manufacturer to be early on involved on the design stage, so everything gets designed properly, and then we don't go farther down the line and try to use remedial solutions for things that could have been avoided early on. And that's it from my side. I hope that it's been brief but useful for each one of you. I think that, again, trying to actually mention a few takeaways is more about how do we change the mindset of not letting fire protection, in this case, to be actually installed or designed or determined at the end of the chain, but actually taking the fire protection as something that is limiting the way we are doing most of the design in a building, and actually dictating how the services should go through, so they fit and they actually are able to fit within fire test data from a specific fire protection material.
Thank you, Louis. It's really, really interesting to listen to your talk and your experience, and to remind the architects that, you know, we have a number of design team members who can support us throughout this design process, and just to know the expertise and skills that you provide at Hilti. I think it's definitely an assurance to our audience members who might be challenged with, you know, the sort of changes in the legislation which are taking place, but then to know that we do have extended members within our design team who can support that process, who are knowledgeable. I think it's really, really key to be able to continue to reiterate that, so that, you know, we know we can deliver what the new legislation is going to require. So I'd like to thank you and Hilti again for that. And I'd like to introduce Paul Bussey, who of AHMM, and he is going to, hi Paul, and he's going to give us the talk, which, you know, I think is going to be really, really useful for our audiences. Paul is going to talk in detail on the role of the principal designer. And again, audience members, if you have questions for Louis and also for Paul, please put them into the chat. We will go through as many of them today. After, we'll have about half an hour to go through the questions. So thank you, Paul.
Thank you, Simone. Thank you for the two speakers for teeing me up. This is very useful. This is the title. I won't go through that. Next, please. But very much we're trying to take on board what Jane and Louis have been talking about here, and how does that apply itself? Next, please. That's me. So the industry has been doing a lot of navel gazing, as you probably all know, over the last few years. Next, please. And one of the outcomes of our working group was to actually, on the right-hand side, see this framework. What you'll see at the very middle is principal designer. And the new PAS that's being developed to show the competence for a principal designer will require a principal designer organizational, that's your company, in my case AHMM, and then there'll be a principal designer individual who will probably be the project architect or lead individual within that organization. It could possibly be external, but probably not, but that's still open for discussion. And what was mentioned earlier about how we pull all this together by Jane, and the new PAS 8671 for the PD role, it talks about orchestration and facilitation. And we've been particularly making this analogy with an orchestra, that the conductor has got to lead that, he's got to facilitate the team, and we need a team to support us. So it's not going to be on your own, it's about mutual liability and how we can actually orchestrate that. And I think you'll find surgeons are out there doing this in a way that there's no reason why we shouldn't be doing this. And there'll be a need to increase our SCEB, skills, knowledge, experience, behaviours, which Jane was touching on with the new book, and the accreditation requirements, and what we do at design stages with the rest of the design team. Next, please. So Jane mentioned the Building Safety Regulator. They are currently forming themselves. They need 700 new appointees. They've apparently got about 100 to 200 so far. So there's still a process ongoing. And currently, local authority, HSE in theory, and the fire brigade are all supervising what's required, together with approved inspectors who are coming in to help with that process, because there's a lot of expertise out there. So increasing visibility during the next year, and it's relying on the local expertise of the regulators that are out there. They're all getting trained up, I assure you, to higher levels. Next, please. So this is, Jane mentioned ARB are going to start assessing us, and I won't go into the details of all these down here, but this is how the RIBA are building up our levels of competence expectations. I'm on various committees to actually try and set that and get that approved by our professions and third parties to say, right, the professions are setting this standard. This is what happens in other professions, as I say, surgeons, etc. And the ARB will be accrediting that and setting up their own register. Next, please. Architects will need to up their skills, knowledge, experience, behaviours. It used to be SCET with training in CDM, but they've dropped that. There's still training required, but behaviours is fundamental, and people have to demonstrate that they are competent. That is the point. Not just to say you are because you're an RIBA member or you've passed your part 3, that you've got to keep up with those standards. So there's these expectations of everybody in this overarching competency framework. Next, please. So the way ahead, again, Jane mentioned this, and you'll see down the right-hand side there that we're looking at actually getting health and safety well-being with the general level for architects, and then advanced study for all buildings, RIBA Principal Designer course, and then there's a Principal Designer for herbs, which has some additional expectations. It's not that many more, to be perfectly honest, so the expectation on all buildings is pretty high, and I think there's 3 extra duties for herbs. I call them herbs, higher risk buildings, which will not only be necessarily 18 meters and 7 stories, etc. Next, please. So Building Safety Regulator, as I say, the new name, it was originally the Joint Competent Authority, and Peter Baker is heading up the organisation. Next, please. So the HSE are really driving this, and all 53 of Dame Judith Hackett's recommendations have been or will be implemented. And there's a famous quotation, she states, that those who create the risk should manage it. And her view is that clients, designers and contractors do so, particularly clients and designers in a way. We're creating something which has risks embedded. We need to identify these and manage them, particularly in terms of fire and structural safety, because currently the whole process is not fit for purpose, and putting residents at the heart of this process. Next, please. So there's an interim industry competence committee, which is I've been representing the RIBA upon. We're getting there. It's quite a slow process because everyone thinks they know how other people should be competent. It's more difficult when you've got to do it yourself. So I'm really backing the architects within this group to try and make sure that we don't have the bar set too high. It's going to be a wide bar. Next, please. So this is a little flowchart which just tries to show in relation to the plan of work what Jane was talking about, procurement, and trying to get within these new gateways, which in theory might well apply to all buildings in the not too distant future, but actually getting all the consultants appointed at an early enough stage to make sure they can meet Gateway 1 with a good standard of fire safety and structural design. And then the Gateway 2 is going to be the next critical stage where we're going to have to get contractor input in. And I think everything that Louis has been showing us has got to come before that Gateway 2 dotted line, because we're going to have all the services designed to a suitable extent to be fire stopping them in the design that Louis has been showing. Because after full plans approval, there should not be design change. Now, that will be interesting to know how that is going to be adopted, particularly under design build. But we certainly know that by Gateway 3, that's got to be all sorted out. But there should not be design change from fire and structural safety during that 2 to 3 work stage. Next, please. So design phase and construction control plans are fundamental, and the construction control plan will potentially modify, could have to go back to the building safety regulator if that happens. So there is, as Jane mentioned, there is a new competence required for all buildings, not only buildings that are herbs as such. And certainly the introduction of more site inspections is going to be fundamental. Next, please. So the building safety regulator is going to have a cost recovery regime. We don't know quite what that will be yet, but they've obviously got to charge for these 700 people they're appointing, and what they've got to do, that might be similar to the way CDM is dealt with, but I think there'll be more advanced consultation, a bit like the pre-apps in planning stages. So that has still got to be finalized. Next, please. And this is, again, just repeating the health and safety guide Jane flashed up in front of you with 5 yearly repeats required, but fire safety design is in there, design risk management, fundamental approach, and it very much relates to CDM. Next, please. So the building regulations, as Jane says, we're strongly working with the new DLUHC to try and make sure we can get a comprehensive and comprehensible set of approved documents and building regulations, because frankly they're not that fit for purpose. And how can you have a regulation as such which is actually will not necessarily meet the requirements? It's ludicrous. And I'm afraid a lot of countries abroad are absolutely aghast that we've got this system of complete ambiguity and flexibility, supposedly for creativity, but actually it creates more havoc than anything. Next, please. So there is a merged document which we're referring to here, and a design process which is almost the inverse of the way the current approved documents are laid out, B1 to 5. Actually, from designer perspective, we've got to work from B5, 4, B1, 3, and 2. No time to explain that today. Next, please. So we're looking at getting, next, please, these 1,274 pages perhaps condensed into a document whereby we can actually say, tick, cross, we're applying this, next, please, and we're not applying the others. And this diagram we're using and that diagram are not. This is fundamentally useful to the building control and a designer and an architect 20 years down the line when there's a problem like Grenfell, and we can backtrack what on earth was designed, because it's almost impossible. I've had to do that for Grenfell. Next, please. So again, when you start going to the British standards, okay, if they're still going to be there as on my table to trump the approved documents, then let's say, right, we use this diagram in BS 9991, and that was an alternative approach. Next, please. So very simply, we're going to start now introducing a lot more criteria that relates to vulnerable people, not just general needs housing for people who are fit and well, and the post-war studies with army squaddies running around buildings, but actually having people of this nature evacuating homes. Next, please. Whoops, missed one there. If we can go back, certainly. And those of you who have ever put a person in a little square box in the corner of a staircase, I think really need to reevaluate that. Is that suitable when you've got the fire brigade coming up with their hoses and all that gear that Jane showed earlier, and actually expecting someone to sit there and be carried down the stair? Don't think that's where we want to be in the future. Next. And understanding in existing buildings what the existing fire penetrations and fire stopping and compartmentation actually is, not assuming that it's actually what was supposedly there when it was originally designed. And we know that Grenfell, that wasn't the case. Lots of other buildings the same. This completely failed at Grenfell. Next. So Edinburgh schools fundamentally was a problem, and this wasn't just structural or fire safety, it's just construction safety was not adequate. And the building safety bill, much to people's surprise, actually will cover other building safety issues, and making sure all those little red blobs on the right hand side are actually dealt with in an appropriate way, and they're not defects that can last for longer than 15 years. Next, please. So this is very much Louis' field. Grenfell failed massively. Lots of our buildings failed from services penetrations for all sorts of pipes, and we generally don't take much notice of those as architects. In the future, we're going to have to a lot more. Next, please. And we've got to identify all the other cases. Fire doors, they work well if they're a fire set, or door set. Corridors and compartments have got to be built appropriately, and any services that run through them, and any voids in the building. So we've got to design all these spaces. We've got to demonstrate that we're compliant. Next, please. So clerks of works will be there to supervise these. There's more clear legislation at the moment, but there's still some gaps in it. And our colleagues at Allies and Morrison have actually shown some sketches to actually improve the current regulations, which were improved, or the approved documents, but there still is a long way to go. Next, please. And certainly the ASFP are providing a lot of information that Louis was particularly talking about. Understanding each of those complex service penetrations is fundamental, and the compartmentation. And if you look at the bottom right, just imagine the complexity of all those services passing through walls. Next, please. So this is all very much a picture of our future. The ASFP have these golden rules, which relate to the RIBA plan of work left, and the numbers on the right relate to the golden rules. You can work your way through that, but this is helping you as architects to understand it. I don't think we'll all be doing it. We'll be getting specialist passive design consultants, Hilti or others, involved in our process a lot earlier, and the MEP has to be designed a lot earlier to cope with this. Next, please. So we're going to quickly we need to demonstrate compliance, better drawings, better diagrams, explicitly showing your travel distances, your compartmentation, your areas that sprinklers are in, etc., etc. And this is fundamental to pass that message on, and it will help insurers to realise that we know what we're doing, because at the moment they don't trust us. Thank you. Next. And certainly on refurbishment projects, it's fundamental that we understand the enclosure of the cores or other compartmentation that is taken as read as being already there, and an inspection of the existing services in the building. So that is fundamental, possibly cold smoke fire tests in existing buildings. Next. So this is to get through Gateway 2. We're going to need this level of information, a legend which perhaps is used across the whole architectural profession. It'd be interesting if we can get our act together and do that. Next, please. And then certainly in the specifications, it's becoming very clear that highlighting that these particular materials are required. We don't want them value engineered. We don't want them changed. But one thing that's also come out is identifying what combustible materials there are, because there's a lot of other combustible materials we still use in our building. So identifying the spec, what we want installed from a fire protection point of view, and also what is potentially combustible, because there will be some. Next, please. So future fire safety drawings are going to have to deal with B5, 4 and 1 in that order at Gateway 1, and they're the early stages. And then as we go into Gateway 2, we're going to need a lot more of B3 and B2, which you can look up what they are, but very much what Louis is talking about during that Gateway 2 process. And ultimately, we've got to make sure that we've got it to a full plans approval level, but probably with contractor assistance. Then finally, we've got to make sure we've got something that shows how it all complies at the end at Gateway 3. Next, please. So just very quickly here, higher risk buildings, the bill will introduce a stricter safety regime with implications for all buildings and the whole construction supply chain. So just because you don't do higher risk buildings doesn't mean to say it's not going to affect you. It will. So it's this juggernaut that Jane's referring to. And care homes and hospitals are now involved as well. So cultural change across the industry. Next, please. And the golden thread: understand, manage, and mitigate building safety risks, prevent, reduce the severity of fire and structural collapse, particularly. Information is key. Stored and structural digital information will apply through design, construction, occupation, refurbishment, and ongoing management. So it's got to be intelligible, comprehensible by the client, and taken forward in the future and passed on to future architects or whoever, and fire and structural safety of the building and people in the vicinity of the building as well. Next, please. So we're coming to the end here. I'm taking you through the labyrinth that this whole process entails. It's cultural change. Golden thread will support the culture within the industry, hopefully, as it requires increased competence and capability, different working practices, updated processes, and a focus on information management and control. It's demonstrating what we're doing, not just doing it, saying, here's the drawings, get on with it. We've got to demonstrate what we've done. The golden thread should be considered an enabler for better and more collaborative working. So next, please. This, I think, is a very complex diagram, which really it was where Jane's previous comments came from. The yellow bits I've added because it wasn't very clear from the government. But I think you can see mid-2021, this whole process really started. The new duty holders will be late 2022. So the new PD will be required then, together with a principal contractor under the Building Safety Bill or Act by then, and also the new Building Safety Manager. And ultimately, mid-late to 2023, it will all be hopefully transitioned. But CDM is still transitioning after 6 years from 2015, so that remains to be seen. So next in this chain here, next slide. This is really, and I won't explain this, these slides will be available via the recording. So the new principal designer role, functions and duties are being discussed this very morning and with others under the PAS, which is a British standard publicly accessible specification, and the draft will be issued in December for overall responsibility to foresee design work, which will be the principal designer's role. And specific carrying out principal designer role, plan, manage and monitor the design work during the design phase. As I've mentioned on the right, this is the same as the lead designer's role. So it very much fits with what we do. It cannot be a third party because they are not involved in enough detail. It could possibly be a client or possibly a project manager, but why do they need architects if they can do it, if they can design everything? So it'll be interesting to know, coordinate matters relating to design work comprised in the project to satisfy themselves that the primary duty is met. So I think I'm not going to go all down through all these, but E, take all reasonable steps to satisfy themselves that designers and any other persons involved in the relation to design work comply with relevant building regulations. So it's making sure that our other consultants are up to speed, and then liaise with the principal contractor and share with the principal contractor any relevant information. So this is very similar to CDM, but takes it a step further into just the design process. I think I'm about there now, if I'm not mistaken. So I think we're on time. Thank you.
I think we are on time, Paul. Thank you very much. Very knowledgeable and interesting for the audience. And I think for me, the main aspect of the talk there that I think the audience will be grateful for is, you know, very often these different aspects of the design can be sort of added on after the architect has created this, you know, magnificent aesthetic beauty. And this is really getting to the foundation that we need to bring these principles right to the start of the project. You know, we need to be thinking about how our fire strategy, where we're going to have our compartments, and how we're going to implement that in the design, and even what kind, not only what impact is it going to have on our design, how is that going to shape the design? You know, it doesn't have to be a negative thing. So I think that I want to thank you again, Paul. It's fantastic as always. And I'm going to invite the other panel members to join us so that we can go through questions and answers. And we've got quite a lot of questions and answers, of questions, obviously, for our panels to give the answers to. And we've only really got about 20 minutes. So yes, I'm going to try and put forward as many as I can. So first of all, I'm just going to get straight to the questions. I have a question from Diva Salam. And will builders, installers require qualifications or equivalent training? Surely without correcting all parties, architects, PI insurance will continue to be a target. And I think that's for Jane.
It probably was initially put to me, but Paul thinks he's got away without having to answer it. I can see this is definitely his area. The truth is that the entire industry has been looking at themselves, looking at how they can increase their competence, their understanding, and really jumping to it. So, and it's not just the architects that need to step up in this. Everybody in the whole industry is looking at themselves to see where they can fit. So it's the professionals, it's the whole of the building control regime, it's the main contractors, it's all the suppliers. The chain goes on and on and on, and everybody is looking at how they can best improve their own standards and their own competence. Does that mean that we're never going to get a case again where the architect is I mean, I call it last man standing, I should say last person standing? I would say not for the time being. We're not really established in a new era or a new regime yet, but we have something that's a target. And hopefully we need to make sure that if there is anybody going for somebody else, it's because the collaboration has failed. And so we can avert that by taking a different attitude, starting working earlier together. And then there's an awful lot one can do with a truly collaborative process, but it's very difficult. Yes. I think that one of the key things to prevent this is understanding of a good procurement route and decent shared contracts so people understand where they are required to step up, and everybody knows everybody's place in this.
Can I add, Simone, just
yes,
quickly?
Yes, you can, of course.
Okay, I have in front of me here the PAS 8672, which is equivalent for principal contractors as the PAS for principal designers. And this morning's meeting was actually about principal contractors. It's gone out for public consultation already. Contractors will need to prove their competence going forward, or principal contractors certainly will. It's not just having enough money in the bank, which is all that contractors had to do in the past, and actually have a CSCS card, which is worse than useless. So actually, we really they need to up their game as well. And that will be an interesting scenario, but it's very strongly part of the building safety bill. Thank you.
And Louis, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think that the question is spot on. I think that competence should be leveled up in every different front. One thing that and I think that we're from my experience at Hilti is where we are always trying to aim when it comes to the concept design of the products is to try to actually minimize the risk of installing it wrong. And basically, once you actually develop products which are easy to install, which doesn't let much space or much room to being installed not properly, that's where you actually are minimizing all the risks. And then, of course, just make sure that everyone or all the ones who are installing it are competent, or that they've just gone through some training. Is always something that will be giving additional benefit.
Thank you very much. So we'll go on to John Kellett from Creative Architects. Why aren't non-architects being required to undertake the same training? I mean, we've spoken a little bit about that, but non-architects designing buildings, why are they allowed to practice? I mean, do you, I don't know exactly who that's for, but just to the panel in general, do you have any views on why a non-architect could design a building, and should it only be architects who can design these buildings, or even principal designers?
Shall I start? That does, sorry, Jane, it comes into the sector of they will have to prove their competence as well. We're not saying it's a closed shop as far as architects are concerned, but we'll have to show our level of competence. CIC are setting up a test for other non-architect designers, which is very similar to our test. So I think they will have to at least pass that as well, or instead of, unless the RIBA open their books to other people. But other organisations like RSCS, ICE, etc., if they want to be a designer and a principal designer, they will have to pass similar tests. So it's not a case that they won't be able to, they will have to, and they will have to prove it as much as anybody else. Thank you.
I also think there's a case to be seen. We all suffer, those of us who have small and medium-sized practice, with people who put very low fees in and to under-resource a project, who are not qualified because they don't have a code of practice that says you're not to do it. But on the other hand, I think we're in a slightly different world now. I don't think it's the same as it was before Grenfell. I think people are very risk averse now. They're particularly worried they're not going to get insurance for their buildings, and they may not be able to sell them in the future. I mean, nobody wants stranded assets if you're developing. But so I think we're in a situation now where we can say truthfully, people will be looking to make sure that the people who they are using and who they have to feel not only are competent because they've got the right piece of paper, but they've actually got sort of, PI cover, that they've got professional backup and proper training. I think people are going to be looking for people in the main who are professionally qualified. I don't think it's for all jobs. I'm sure the very smallest jobs will always have people that will compete just on fees and not on experience or skills. But actually, the building safety bill covers everybody. So I don't know. Maybe this is something that the insurance industry will be leading on. If people can't insure their buildings unless there's somebody competent to run it, I don't think we should think architects are the only people who can do work on buildings. Of course, there's many brilliant architectural technicians, there's surveyors, people who actually know about building and can do a good job. So long as they pass the competence test, I don't see there's a problem. They may not be able to tackle beauty the same way we can.
Thank you.
Don't laugh, Paul. It's important.
We'll go on to the next question from Rose McLaughlin, and that is that it's again talking about the sort of training aspect. Is the health and safety test likely to cause issues for architects not currently working in a traditional manner in terms of having working knowledge? Would
No.
anyone touch on those points?
I'm going to say that this is not a terribly difficult test. You do not have to know everything about everything in terms of building safety and fire safety. You just have to be. You just have to be able to use common sense.
Exactly.
And I don't think this should stress anybody. If you want to maintain your professional qualifications, you've got to have a level which everybody meets, and basic competence in the skills you need. And I have to say, safety has been one for a long time. We've all had to do CPD on health and safety, irrespective of what field you're working in. This is an expansion of it. That's all. Luckily, we've got some lovely guidance, and Paul, the lovely Paul, does some amazing CPD. So if you feel you're needing a bit of help, try and get on one of his courses. They're very popular.
Yes.
Could I just add, thanks for that plug, Jane. But having looked at this document here, it was described the other day very complimentarily as the Ladybird guide to fire and structural safety, i.e. lots of lovely pictures, very graphic, and very good text in simple English rather than detailed British standard type language, of some very simple concepts that many of us learned at O level at school. Really in that physics class which we did in the science block. So it's not actually rocket science. And I think you have 5 chances to pass it as well. So that should give most architects a good run in, I think, there to fail a couple of times.
I would just say you do not have to be a fire engineer to pass this. You just need to be sensible. To be honest, why are we not all sensible?
Yeah, I mean, I would just like to add myself that I think that sometimes there's so much legislation, regulations and documents and references. Sometimes it can become, a little bit intimidating. And so I would just support those 2 messages, that it is really about logical, designing a building which is going to stand, which is going to be robust, which is going to be safe for people to be within. And then you've got a suite of documentation to support that and to detail that. So I think that's always the logical for me. Louis, I don't know, what's your experience at Hilti?
Yeah, so when it comes to actually training or upskilling in terms of competence, I think that we've always not only focused when we've been actually working and delivering CPDs to architects and main contractors, we don't only focus on the product side of it, we also focused on the regulation side of it. Why? The main reason is exactly what Jane and Paul have just mentioned. There are a few concepts that are very easy to understand, and that will give you a very broad understanding on how the products are being tested and what product you will need to go for. And again, that will give you the first steps to actually understand it. Then further down the line, if that gets into more complicated or out of those standards, then that's where you would probably require a fire engineer, but not for an initial, let's say, assessment of the solutions to adopt.
Okay, that's really useful, Louis. I'm going to move on to the next question, which is from for Sing Sung Thomas, and that is: are principal designers a named individual or architectural practice? They can be a named individual or an architectural practice. Paul, did you want to elaborate a bit more on that?
Yeah, I was just grabbing the PAS, but that was the last slide I was showing. But there's the new PAS is talking about an organizational principal designer, which will be the company, as I say, very much as way AHMM work. But they will have to have almost perhaps a director who's very familiar with this process. Otherwise, there's not a kind of controlling mind. And then that's you, Jane. Yeah, you're sitting up. So then you might well have someone, the lead designer of a project, who knows the ins and outs of that project and every part of it in a comprehensive way, who will become the organizational PD, principal designer. It might have someone like me I've spent some time in the health and safety world to understand what they're talking about, but also an architect assisting that process. Or it could be someone, your lead designer, your project architect needs to have a bit more health and safety and fire training. But again, that is the PD course that the RIBA are rolling out next year. We're already doing it. We're extending it a bit when the legislation becomes clearer. So hopefully that answers that question.
I believe it does. Let's move on to another question, because we do have quite a lot, and I want to make sure everyone is able to get their question across. So it's from Bob Eden. In reality, construction is not a perfect process. Who is supposed to pick up on these failures, and who is responsible for on-site supervision? I think that's open for the panel.
Okay. Well, look, from my perspective, there's two levels really. There's oversight in terms of the building safety regulator, and that's a legislative process. I mean, an oversight is something that I think we all had thought we were provided with in terms of building control, who are still going to be there. They're part of the process. But I have to say, as a principal designer, irrespective, I think, of the form of contract, whether it's traditional design and build or anything else, as a principal designer, you have to be able to follow this through, because you have a duty not just to ensure that the design is correct and will meet building regulations, but also that the construction is also meeting regulations and will keep people safe. So it's an ongoing process. It's impossible, I think, for a principal designer not to visit site. The real question is, how do you supervise on site? As a principal designer, as a lead designer, as an architect, and this is a real worry for me. Through this process, I see it as all being common sense and easy, but I found over the last few years more and more practices who are not allowing their young architects to visit site, or they're not even doing delivery of buildings. They're designing.
Yes.
So it's extremely difficult to get the right experience. But I think this is something that needs to be tackled during the course of, when I say education, I mean ongoing education, so CPD. Maybe we've got to do something more with that, because you have to know what you're looking at when you go to site. You can't just hope that everything's been done okay. Obviously, there's backup. We are just, as architects, the sort of leader of the orchestra. If we've got all the right people in all the right places to do all the reviews, we're not M&E consultants. We don't know about MEP. We can't go on the site and check that it's all Hilti's done the right thing. We can take it from Louis. It's wonderful. Of course it will be. But the truth is, we can't sign it off ourselves because we don't have that specialism. But we can get other specialists, on-site clerks of works. We can get all sorts of people who will provide our team as principal designer to ensure that it's being done. Does that answer the question?
That's very helpful.
Could I add, Simone? Sorry, just to qualify that. But there's certainly, I think Bob mentioned it's not a perfect process, and the HSE know that. Demonstrating that you've done as much as you could, there's going to be unforeseeable issues which are going to occur. And the argument at the moment is, was Grenfell foreseeable or wasn't it? It wasn't for a lot of people, but it was perhaps to some. But there's no expectation that you'll have a crystal ball to foresee everything. So only foreseeable issues. And there is a qualification which comes under the CDM regulations about so far as reasonably practicable and taking all reasonable steps. So that is an insurable position with the PI insurance world.
Yes, and I think that's really important to know, because and to share with the audience, because it is, an architect, you have a duty to do as much as you can to fulfill your duties. And what you've touched on, Paul, just there, is that this is actually an insurable aspect, which you can prove that you've done all that you could possible for that building. So it's not just saying I couldn't have access, or it wasn't it wasn't my responsibility. It's we're trying to deliver building excellence here, and it should be upon us to do as much as we can to make sure that our knowledge and expertise is well used for that project.
Just quickly, could I add also, there's a scrutiny PAS which we're discussing at the RIBA group as well, about on-site supervision and how we orchestrate the rest of the team members to sign off their bit of the project. So that is also work in progress.
If I can.
Yes.
If I can.
Did you want to add to that, Louis, please?
Yes, so there's actually something that I pick up from what yourself, Jane, and Paul have mentioned, which is a clear definition in the industry of that role. Who is going to be doing this supervision? Which are the competence, or what is the competence that this person has to have to be able to do that? And that is on the personal side. That is actually on the supervision side of it. But also, and it's something that happens quite a lot on the side, is the hidden parts that we cannot see. Basically, when you install something, specifically, we can take a specific example about a bit of coated board and mastic. Those things are hidden. Nobody can check unless you open it up, whether those are being installed properly or not. Meaning that I think that there should be a push as well from the industry to actually ask for more innovative or more innovation in the industry, things that can be easily checked and that have not hidden components that will lead to a bad installation. So I think that those are the two key factors there.
Could I add there, Louis? Good point. But it also, if we increasingly in the future use artificial intelligence, video cameras of the work being undertaken and recordings and photographs, we can actually have things hidden, but they're explained how they've been done. So I think that is very much the future.
Yep.
I actually think the photograph bit is very much the present.
True.
Most of the architects I know who go to site and have a role on site will take it. I mean, it doesn't need to be a camera anymore, does it? You just take a phone and you just ask to be shown things because you know that you need to, and you photograph them in early stages. Everybody does it. I mean, we've got dozens and dozens of photographs which we keep of work in progress on building sites, and it's not difficult to keep them anymore. It's all digital, and that's part of the stuff that can be passed on. I think it's part of the golden thread. I think it's vital visual information.
Well, we do have more questions, but I don't think that we're going to have all of the time to answer these. Maybe these can be put forward to, I don't know, Amber, if Amber can collect some of these questions and put them forward to the panel, and they can be answered by email or maybe as a follow-up to the next session, because I do want to spend the last couple of minutes just thanking our panel members, thanking Jane, Duncan, chair of this fire expert panel, and all the work that you've done to inform the architects about the changes in the legislation, and just being able to passionately share how there's actually an opportunity for architects to become more knowledgeable, and to sort of have a better positioning in the work that they're doing on the buildings and sites that they're working on. And then to Louis, Ayllón, I'm really grateful that you've been able to participate as well, from Hilti, who have supported these talks throughout for a number of years, I believe, and I'm quite certain we'll continue to do so, and just being able to bring that knowledge again to our members, to our audience, and all the work that you continue to do, and how we can partner better, and ensure that we're able to be supported by those expertise. And of course, Paul Bussey at AHMM, again, just knowing so very knowledgeable, and the work that you're doing with Jane, and even myself, I'm on this fire expert group. It's fantastic, continuing to develop a better position for the architects and to be able to give us so much knowledge and expertise. So I did want to say that there was a question about the seminar and whether the webinar will be available for afterwards, and it will actually be uploaded. I think it's going to be on YouTube or on the RIBA website. I'm not quite certain, but you will get those details. It has been recorded and it will be available in the next couple of days. And I just wanted to thank our audience for all of your for your support, for turning up today. It's been fantastic, and we will continue to look forward to having you at these events. It's very important, very knowledgeable, and it's very important that you participate. So thank you, everyone, and RIBAJ for hosting.
Thank you, Simone.
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Simone.
Thank you.